Hi, my name is Ahmed Ijaz and I'm a telecoms, media and technology professional. I have created this presentation to talk today at a high level and in layman terms about the rapidly evolving telecommunications ecosystem and the opportunities, challenges and risks faced by communications service providers. The idea is to construct a storyline spanning around 30 minutes or so and create a broad picture which can then be dissected in subsequent sessions for details on individual topics. Now, over the course of the past 30 years, service providers across different countries and regions of the world made good money on high revenues, high margins, and high growth rates from primarily voice services. But it all started to go down with saturation hitting different regions and countries at different rates and at different times, to the point now that over the past decade, voice has become more of a low margin commodity and not really a driver of revenue growth for service providers. Voice has thus come of age, and service providers must look elsewhere. Now, over the years, different messaging services were promoted with a bid to make up for declining revenues from core voice services. These and other value added services were a mass success and substituted any deficits from voice revenues very gracefully. However, with the recent surge in IP based messaging, this substitution is also being challenged, which brings us to the next wave of substitution, where basic data services initially started to make up for declining messaging revenues. To start with, data speeds were limiting with the second generation of data services, and so were the devices. In other words, until the iPhone brought a revolution to consumer access to the internet, devices were pretty rudimentary, and users of data services were small in number. Nonetheless, the stage was set for something big, perhaps for a revenue stream as big or bigger than traditional voice. The stage was set for high speed internet access and broadband services. Along came Steve Jobs' brainchild, the iPhone, using the third generation of high speed data services. The ecosystem of data hungry applications and services that ensued resulted in a phenomenal rise in revenues from data services. Operators went on incurring high capex and opex to not miss the party, and literally it ushered into a new era of data based communications services where voice only existed in the shadows. Data access is set to grow by leaps and bounds in the years to come. According to a survey by Cisco, global mobile data traffic grew by 133% in 2011, and it's set to grow at a compound annual growth rate of 78% from 2011 to 2016. Asia Pacific and Western Europe will account for over half of global mobile traffic by 2016. And Middle East and Africa will have 36-fold growth in 4 years from now, while Asia Pacific will grow 21-fold. Now, you can find more compelling evidence and data to appreciate the rising importance of mobile broadband, but the key things to note are, first, that operator revenues for the many years to come will be defined by data services. Secondly, that everything will work on top of a uniform underlying IP framework. That operators will need to create open systems and networks which external parties can use over standard cloud-based interfaces to create new services and possibilities. And finally, since ever rising consumer and enterprise demand for data is forcing operators to invest in data infrastructures such as radio access and backhaul networks. The rising costs are putting a downwards pressure on margins, and operators must look into ways to address this issue. Now, let's stop here for a moment and review what we just did. We saw how operators lived through the golden days of voice revenues, which upon fading were made up for by revenues from value-added services, and we saw how basic first and second generation data services provided some additional cushion, and we enjoyed talking about how data services in 3G and 4G technology resulted in a whole new and stronger revenue contributor, and how this is set to go for some time to come. What we want to see now is, first, how the ongoing data regime will fare for service providers. What are the challenges and opportunities? And second and most important, what lies next? What will substitute this ongoing tide of data services, and what opportunities, risks, challenges, and evolution lie for service providers in the long term? Let's first look at the ongoing data tsunami from a customer standpoint. Now, we can say with a certain degree of comfort that the demand for data services and higher data speeds will remain intact. This is because of the availability of smartphones and other advanced devices, the possibility of high-speed broadband networks, and the never-ending supply of innovative services, content, and applications. Interestingly, many surveys suggest consumers would rather give up other things, such as a vacation, but not let go of their data connections. Then, solutions in this data regime would be dictated by the context. That is, what a service should do or deliver on, what communication mode it should use, what security profile it should have, and how it must be deployed. From a customer standpoint, customers in this regime, private consumers, professionals, or enterprise customers, would use multiple devices and possibly multiple connections at home, at work, outside, or anywhere to access a wide variety of services. Such is the degree of seamlessness, mobility, and lifestyle enablement that customers would need. Uh, um, they would not just feel happy about, but really consider it as their birthright. Also, mobile video is expected to be the biggest contributor to data volumes consumed by consumers and enterprises over the coming years. As forecasted by Cisco here, mobile video will generate over 70% of mobile data traffic by 2016. Then, from an access technology standpoint, already and over the coming years, customers will access broadband both from their fixed lines at home or at work, using such technologies as fiber to the home, and from their mobile devices using advanced technologies such as 4G. Also, fixed and mobile service providers may tend to merge or cooperate to provide users with a convergent and seamless experience. This would lead to uh, all the wireless and wireline traffic aggregating into an optimized packet network and forwarded to a converged IP core. Eventually, different infrastructures will evolve and converge to a single all IP architecture based on such specifications as IMS, or the IP multimedia system. Let's now talk about the most important aspect of this data dictated communications landscape. the services. And services in this landscape are primarily over-the-top services, which are fast replacing even core operator services such as voice. Over-the-top players today are powerful forces in different spheres. For example, Skype in communications, or Facebook in social networking, or Google Wallet for financials and electronic money, Netflix and Hulu for content and entertainment, Amazon for merchandise. The decoupling of OTT services from the underlying network has been revolutionary in terms of the freedom it has given to these network agnostic players. Essentially, this lets over the top players enjoy high margin services while the service providers are left with the boring and commoditized job of managing old and dumb pipes. The question is, should service providers resign to this fate, or should they do something about it? As explained by this analysis from Cisco, a smartphone user adopting Netflix, Pandora, and Facebook will generate more than twice the volume of traffic generated by a smartphone user adopting only email and web applications. So, in a way, service providers should actually welcome these cloud-based OTT services as they're producing those volumes. The problem or the resentment that service providers may face here is not that there is a dearth of volumes, but that over-the-top players enjoy all the high-margin services and leave the low-margin transport of bits and bytes to service providers. That is the resentment. So the biggest and most pertinent question here is, how do service providers somehow get some of the cake that over-the-top players are enjoying all by themselves? Or at least what to do to stay relevant and significant in this new services ecosystem? And in trying to answer that, it should be useful recounting and recalling what are typical service providers' key strengths and assets that can be used to develop competitiveness in this arena. We know that service providers hold the network and the quality of service delivered on the network. Service providers can use this capability to guarantee certain SLAs between consumers and suppliers of content or OTT services. For example, to ensure a high quality experience for video content, which by the way will be the crux of data volumes, service providers can guarantee a certain quality of service between content providing servers and end devices. Now, as to who will pay for this remains a question. Will the content providers pay for it? Will the consumers pay for it? Or maybe a bit of both? That remains to be seen. Secondly, operators are traditionally very customer aware entities by virtue of having established trust over long years of everyday services spanning lifestyles and private and professional contexts. Operators enjoy access to extensive customer and service profiles and have deep insights into everyday usage. On the contrary, over-the-top players are much more upstream and do not have such level of customer insights. Service providers can thus bridge this divide between over-the-top players and the end customers. Thirdly, service providers have been bundling divergent services into a convergent customer experience for a while now. Service providers can thus sell these capabilities to over-the-top players and bundle these over-the-top services along with other core services. Service providers can also provide such functions as customer care and other support functions on behalf of over-the-top players who are best off spending their time specializing in a focused service area. Now, one thing that we have not listed here is how service providers can develop their own OTT services. That is, develop services which run on a convergent IP framework. Let us now talk for a bit about the mergers and acquisitions and the horizontal integration forces that service providers have to deal with. Firstly, we have discussed enough now as to how infrastructures have become mere commodities or utilities. So only those operators will be able to survive which can muster scale. In other words, smaller players will be wiped out or forced to do something different, something innovative. Secondly, a landscape where services rapidly converge and customers demand multiple products of the same service provider, it will be very important to achieve economies of scope through horizontal development in different service areas. Thirdly, horizontal integration would eliminate redundant capacities in individual operators. After the integration, existing redundancies can then be put to use over a period of time, or they can be simply sold off. And finally, network sharing has already proven to be very good economics for service providers, and it will only enhance with more horizontal integration. Essentially, whatever infrastructure companies exist today may have to, or in other words, may be forced by investors or technological evolution or competition to consolidate into becoming mega infrastructure providers. And these consolidated infrastructures will need to be exposed to the service provider community over standard and open interfaces. In other words, this is infrastructure as a service as we know it, and at a mass level, where customer facing service providers get rid of heavy infrastructures and become light entities focused on customer needs. One other important consequence of such an arrangement is that the differences between service providers and over-the-top players reduce, and an ecosystem of service innovators emerges with very vague boundaries. And this collaborative ecosystem works together to provide customers with services. A slight variation to this story can also happen where service providers remain committed to their heavy infrastructures in a bid to better compete with heavy over-the-top players. Here, service providers would still consolidate, but they won't let go of their pipes, as pipes are their differentiating factors compared to over-the-top players. Using these pipes, they can come up with solutions for industry verticals, which, by the way, we'll discuss in a little more detail a bit later. Also, voice over IP will not just remain an over-the-top service, as service providers will provide their own voice over IP solutions as technologies such as LTE gain wide adoption. For providers, this means a move in the long term to such open systems as IMS, with services rendered over the IP. For example, voice over LTE or SMS over LTE. So, in different parts of the world and based on different regulatory, technological, and economic conditions, different service providers will float on a spectrum of control and ownership. From trying to compete on every front on their own, such as from wholesale infrastructure leasing to retail services such as voice over IP, to opening up in certain areas such as infrastructure sharing and access while still remaining adamant about trying hard to compete in customer services. Two, standardizing and opening themselves and becoming part of an entirely collaborative ecosystem where everyone shares resources and where everyone learns to coexist through business models which allow for revenue sharing amidst ecosystem partners. This last case may take many years to materialize, though. Now, in addition to horizontal integration, which is inevitable anyway, service providers can either integrate or partner uh, vertically across the value chain to reduce service development times, such as through backward integration, and to get closer to different customer segments through forward integration. All of this will be done in a bid to compete with other over-the-top players. Upstream integrations will allow service provider companies to commit to each other in terms of research and orders, resulting in shortened product and service development times, timely supplies, and guaranteed business. Uh, Now, this option requires a lot of consolidation horizontally and vertically, and maybe a bit too much to ask, realistically speaking, which brings us to another possibility where traditional companies open themselves to other players in a symbiotic relationship. One example can be selling premium connectivity to over the top and content based services and operate more on a B2B model, leaving end customers to companies with superior customer experience capabilities. And lastly, we have something on the lines of IMS and other open system initiatives where telco capabilities are wrapped as functions and available for use by any core or third party to deliver any service. Here, monetizing this open ecosystem will be key to success uh, for each party and especially for service providers. In this case, communications companies will not deal with over the top players or other players on a piecemeal basis. Instead, the ecosystem will be collaborative enough to secure new relationships dynamically and in real time. Now, we know that OTT, over the top, and content services and the applications that we've been talking about largely operate on a cloud model. The biggest problem here, however, arises not from the supplier of cloud services, not from the ever demanding consumers, but from the networks which carry and deliver these services. These networks operate on a best effort model, so delivery for many real time cloud applications can be compromised. Other concerns apart from quality of service include security, who must own the data where, and availability of different service components. Also, a service may not be legal in one jurisdiction, and hence it may not be delivered there. All of these concerns are within the power of the network operators to resolve. As network operators own these delivery networks, and it's here that network operators have a huge opportunity for both the consumer and the enterprise clouds and cloud services. The biggest challenge for network operators is to optimize their network architectures as it involves a lot of costs. For this reason, it's important to identify those over the top services and their market sizes which can be easily monetized against these optimization costs. Apart from latency, network operators also need to introduce security and regulatory compliance to their offerings, traffic management techniques which network operators are already familiar with can be employed to reduce latency. Similarly, policies can be enforced to prioritize certain services over other services. For enterprises, network operators can manage the end-to-end connectivity, including the hosting of data centers. All in all, network operators here can deliver a lot of value in the cloud services ecosystem. And although a lot of costs are involved, greater monetization can be achieved by providing end-to-end solutions to enterprises, to content providers, and to different over-the-top giants. We've seen now how the ongoing surge in data access has been so beneficial for service providers, and how so many opportunities have appeared for providers to realize. And we've seen also the challenges, the risks, and the changing ecosystem trends putting us, a downward pressure at the same time. The interplay between these two dimensions will decide what becomes of service providers in the years to come. However, what about once this data-led world matures? What's the next set of opportunities that service providers must start preparing from now on? Let's now try and make an attempt to think a bit ahead and the future. Outside of the core voice, data access, messaging, cloud-based services, etc., a world of opportunities lies for service providers in different industries and different enterprise verticals. And just like over-the-top players, which are creating customized solutions for dedicated domains, operators can also select certain verticals and develop end-to-end solutions for these verticals. These include, among others, energy companies, to healthcare and wellness players, to commerce and e-commerce providers, to the banking and the financial industry. Also, these can include both the private and the public sectors. In some cases, uh, communications providers will need to take a role in more of a supportive way, enabling other players, such as over-the-top players, to deliver customized services to certain industries, to certain domains. While in many other cases, communications providers may provide end-to-end services for these verticals or for certain large customers. In any case, communications providers will need to develop more robust networks which can respond to compelling and customized needs of different types of verticals or strategic customers. The idea indeed sounds very exciting, promising, but it comes with its own intense challenges for service providers attempting for these vertical solutions. First, we should see that as operators jump into different industries and provide services other than basic communications services, the revenues from different verticals will be very different. For example, the luxury industry has different revenues from the energy sector, which in turn is very different from healthcare. The revenues extracted from different vertical solutions would thus be very, very different in nature and not comparable in terms of structure and value. Also, each vertical may have a different lifetime for the service provider to extract the value from. It will be very hard and critical for service providers to choose the right areas, to the right verticals to get in. Second, Some industries are heavily regulated and are very difficult to operate in. Also, for many private and public domains, it's hard to predict now what events and forces in the future will shape up the policies of regulators in the years to come. Mobile wallets and electronic payments, for example, have already seen regulatory difficulties around the world. Third, the over-the-top players who will have a bit of an advantage over service providers for their being very asset light and for their being very close to end customer segments. These OTTs, these over-the-top players, would have specialized capabilities for dedicated areas of interest, and it'll be very hard for service providers to compete with them as generalists. Fourth, there will, of course, be competition from other service providers. This can, however, turn into cooperation as well. If in certain cases, for example, service providers can join hands against over-the-top players in creating a better value proposition for a certain ecosystem. Fifth, certain domains can have very powerful incumbents. This is especially true of the internet industry, for example, where over-the-top players already have a very strong hold. Examples include Apple, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and whatnot. Sixth, as network infrastructure and as network resources become more of a service which any player can access without having to invest humongous amounts, new asset light players can very easily emerge in the competition without any significant barriers to entry. Our seventh point pertains to organizational learning. By all means, it will be very, very hard for large organizations that service providers of the future will be, as we've discussed, to learn new ecosystems fast enough to outcompete other more nimble players. Being able to adapt the organization to respond to delivering solutions to new ecosystems will really be a conundrum for large-sized consolidated service providers. This point may actually be the biggest reason for service providers never ever being able to get into this game and remain destined as dumb pipe providers. We may discuss this point in more detail in another presentation. Lastly, we know that different industries will require to be charged and billed differently. Pricing models of the past used for voice or data bundles won't work. Moreover, complex wholesale charging arrangements will be required to deal with multiple partners and contributors in the service delivery ecosystem. To, to venture into such a demanding new ecosystem, service providers will need to raise a lot of money and enhance their ongoing earnings to match these new debts. And to enhance earnings, operators will need to cut costs through shedding their workforce, transforming their business operations, outsourcing, and network sharing, and the list goes on. Operators will need to become as nimble and profitable as other players in the new ecosystem, such as, for example, Apple. Sharing resources such as network infrastructures and spectrums will help service providers cooperate on heavy assets and compete with each other on better products, marketing, and customer service. In this session, we have just tried to touch different ideas, opportunities, challenges, and trends which relate to communication service providers and the ecosystems they operate in at a very, very high level. We believe that the stage is set for us to pick different bits and expand them into detailed discussions out of this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and please stay tuned for more follow-up presentations. Thank you.